They treated me like a burden until the house documents were read aloud. There are moments in life when you realize you have slowly been reduced, not all at once, not loudly, but quietly, piece by piece. The day I understood my own family no longer saw me as a mother or a grandmother, but as a weight they wished someone else would carry. I did not protest. I listened, and I remembered everything. I am an old woman now. My hands show it. My voice carries it. But there was a time when these same hands built a life from almost nothing. I married young, worked hard, raised children with little sleep and much faith. My husband and I bought our house after many years of saving. It was not large, but it was solid. Walls built with patience endure longer than those built with haste. When my husband passed, the house grew quieter, not empty, just still. I stayed because memory deserves respect. I believed my children understood that. I was wrong. My son returned first. He said it was temporary, just until things stabilize. He told me. I agreed. A mother does not ask questions when her child knocks on the door. His wife followed soon after. She smiled often in the beginning. She praised the house, spoke of comfort, spoke of family, but her eyes measured things. Rooms, furniture, ownership. Small changes came quickly. My chair was moved. My habits were interrupted. My voice was no longer consulted. You don't need to worry about that, she would say. Worry, as if concern were a flaw. Gradually, I became an inconvenience. Meals were planned without asking me. Conversations paused when I entered the room. Decisions were made elsewhere. I always noticed. One evening, I overheard her speaking to my son. She's slowing us down, she said. She can't keep living like this forever. As if time were something I had borrowed from them. My son said nothing. That silence was louder than any insult. From that day on, the tone changed. Not openly cruel, just dismissive, cold, as if kindness were a currency they no longer wished to spend. I began to hear the word burden, not directly, but implied, in sighs, in glances, in decisions made for me, without me. I did not argue. Age teaches restraint. And restraint, when paired with clarity, becomes power. One morning, my daughter-in-law spoke plainly. This arrangement isn't practical anymore, she said. Practical, a word that often hides selfishness. I asked her what she meant. She looked surprised that I asked at all. We need space, she said, and structure. Structure. I nodded and said nothing, because sometimes silence is not surrender. It is preparation. After that conversation, nothing was said openly. And yet, everything had been decided. There is a particular kind of cruelty that does not raise its voice. It simply rearranges the world until you no longer fit inside it. That was what began to happen to me. My place at the table changed. Not officially, no one announced it, but somehow, I was always seated last, always served after. Sometimes, not at all. If you're hungry, there's something left in the kitchen, my daughter-in-law would say. Leftovers, as if nourishment were no longer my right. The house grew loud without including me. Laughter in rooms I was no longer invited into. Plans made behind closed doors. I would enter, and conversations would pause, then resume once I left. That silence is deliberate, and it wounds deeply. My son began to speak to me differently, not unkind, detached, as one speaks to someone whose opinions are no longer relevant. You don't need to worry about bills, he said once. We're handling that now. Handling that word again. I noticed mail no longer came in my name. I noticed documents moved from where I kept them. I noticed drawers that no longer closed the same way. Someone had been searching. One afternoon, my daughter-in-law stood in the doorway of my room. She looked around. This space could be used better, she said. Better, not for you, just better. I folded my clothes more carefully after that, not out of fear, out of awareness. The real humiliation came quietly. A family gathering, relatives I had not seen in months. I prepared food, as I always had, but when the table was set, there was no place for me. Oh, she said lightly, noticing at last. I thought you'd eat later. Later, always later. I sat alone in the kitchen that evening. I did not cry. I had passed the age where tears solved anything. What I felt was clarity. They spoke openly now, about the house, about changes, about how things would be once everything was settled, as if I were a loose matter needing resolution. One night, I heard my daughter-in-law say something that removed all doubt. She doesn't need to be here forever, she told my son. We've done enough. Enough. That word again. And my son replied with silence. That was the moment betrayal took shape. Not in anger, in agreement. I remained calm, outwardly unchanged. But inside, I began to gather myself. I stopped offering opinions, stopped correcting small things, stopped reminding them of the past. People reveal much when they believe you are no longer paying attention. The betrayal did not arrive in a single sentence. It arrived gradually, dressed as practicality. One morning, my son sat across from me at the table. He did not look angry. He looked resolved. "We've been talking," he said, "and we think it might be best if you considered other living arrangements." Other, as if this house had not been mine long before it was ever theirs. I asked where he thought I should go. He hesitated. "That can be figured out later," he said. Later, a word used when the present is inconvenient. My daughter-in-law stood behind him, arms crossed, expression calm. She nodded once, as if confirming a decision already made. That night, I lay awake, not because I was afraid, but because something finally settled into place. They were not planning with me. They were planning around me. And that distinction mattered. Soon after, papers appeared on the table. Not official ones, printed pages, suggestions, lists. They spoke about healthcare, about assisted living, about how difficult it must be for me. Difficult. I was still cooking my own meals, still walking on my own, still fully aware. I noticed they spoke about me even when I was present. "She forgets things," my daughter-in-law said once. "She gets confused." I looked at my son. He said nothing. Silence, again, choosing a side. One afternoon, I found a folder in the drawer where I kept my important papers. It had been opened, rearranged. That was the moment I understood something crucial. They were preparing. Without me. I said nothing. But I began to pay closer attention. I noticed how often my daughter-in-law mentioned ownership, how she spoke of the house as ours, how confidently she planned renovations. People grow careless when they believe victory is inevitable. A neighbor stopped me one day. "I heard you're moving," she said gently. I looked at her. "I wasn't aware," I replied. She flushed. "Oh, they said it was already decided." Already decided. That phrase followed me home. That evening, I stood in my room and looked around. At the furniture my husband and I had bought together. At the walls that had witnessed our life. I realized then that waiting would cost me everything. But acting loudly would cost me dignity. So, I chose a third path. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not to impress anyone, but to remind myself who I was. I gathered my documents, slowly, methodically, and I left the house without announcing it. The building was modest, the sign unassuming, but the person inside listened. Really listened. When I explained everything, the lawyer did not interrupt. When I finished, she leaned back and said quietly, "They're assuming you won't respond." She paused. "That assumption gives you time." Time, at last. Something that belonged to me. We spoke of rights, of records, of documents signed long ago and never changed. Nothing dramatic, just facts. Facts are powerful when people ignore them. When I left that office, the world looked the same. But I was no longer standing on uncertain ground. Meanwhile, at home, their confidence grew. They believed the story was ending. They were wrong. It was only being prepared. The meeting was not announced as anything important. That was intentional. My daughter-in-law preferred things informal when she believed she held control. It keeps others unguarded. She invited a few relatives, spoke of final arrangements, of future planning. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, unremarkable, unquestioned, exactly where she believed I belonged. My son avoided my eyes. He sat beside her, nodding as she spoke. About renovations, about selling possibilities, about what would happen once everything was official. Official, that word again. Then the lawyer arrived, right on time. She did not greet the room loudly. She greeted me, by name. That small detail unsettled them. My daughter-in-law straightened in her chair. "I wasn't expecting legal counsel," she said. The lawyer smiled politely. "That's understandable," she replied. "You weren't meant to." She placed the folder on the table, thick, ordered, final. She spoke slowly, not emotionally, fact by fact. She explained ownership, dates, signatures. She read aloud documents signed decades earlier, long before anyone imagined the current arrangement. My daughter-in-law interrupted. "That can't be right," she said sharply. "We lived there." The lawyer looked at her calmly. "Living somewhere does not transfer ownership," she said. "Consent does." The room fell silent. For the first time in months, no one spoke over me. Then came the final page, the one they had never seen, prepared recently, legally witnessed, unmistakable. The lawyer read it aloud. The house was never transferred, not to my son, not to his wife, and it never would be. The consequences unfolded without shouting, without drama. They would need to leave. Plans would be reversed. Assumptions corrected. My daughter-in-law's confidence collapsed into disbelief. My son looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, he understood what silence had cost him. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I simply stood and said one sentence. I was never a burden. I was patient. That was all. They moved out quietly. Questions followed. Explanations failed. Reputations shifted. That is how truth works when it is finally allowed to speak. I sold the house later, on my terms. I walked through every room one last time, not with bitterness, with closure. Now I live simply, peacefully, with dignity intact. And if there's one thing I wish you to understand, it is this: age does not erase rights. Silence does not mean weakness, and patience, when paired with preparation, always outlasts cruelty.